there's just so much richness in the history and so much innovation, and so many of the therapy models that are now practiced as mainstay therapy models were marriage and family therapy models. Just amazing brilliance and innovation that happened in the last half of the 20th century in regard to treatment approaches and modalities and theoretical constructs.
I want to know what the definition of equity is. We hear diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity sounds good as long as it's, diversity of everything and it's not compulsory, because that would be a violation of autonomy also. I get inclusion. We want to be inclusive. That's fine. I don't want to exclude people, except the organization itself is exclusive because it portends that it's better than everybody else.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast. I'm here with Jake Wiskerchen, and nipping at the heels of Katie Kernodle is Jonathan Cogburn. So we were initially scheduled to talk about some changes proposed in marriage and family therapy, but before recording, we were having a very interesting conversation on, I guess, just how much social media affects our psyche. I know, like, for myself personally, there's certain things in my life, like this podcast, that I feel like is part of my life mission. And there's times when I'll post something and then spend the next 45 minutes scrolling on X and realize that part was not part of what I'm really here for, And I think that's kind of some of what we're digging into.
And that concludes our podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for tuning in and downloading Reality Therapy. You can reach us on all platforms.
He's always trying to end the podcast early.
I don't like talking.
That's funny considering what you do for a living and et cetera.
Ryan, I think brings up a point that probably is, when comedians go on stage and they make a joke that hits a little too close to home and the audience kind of shudders, and then he has to fill in the silence gap where there's supposed to be laughter, but instead there's gasps. He goes, yeah, there's some elbows and ribs going on here, right? That's pretty much what's happening. He's, I have a podcast. I have two podcasts. I don't manage really either of them, but I definitely monitor them, and I've done it for several years. Same thing, right? You post some content, guns and mental health. There it is. Walk the Talk America. WTTA.org/love. Take a free and anonymous mental health screening today. I'm really good at these live reads, aren't I? So
it's perfect.
We'll post something, and then the vortex sucks us in, and we end up doom scrolling. And what kicked this off for the listening audience, because you weren't privy to the pregame conversation, is that I left several group chats of which I'm a part. One of which involves these two gentlemen. About 2 days ago, I just was like, guys, I can't do this anymore. There's too much stimulus. I got too many communication avenues on my phone, and I actually posted on X about. I tallied them up. There was like 17 different things through which I actively communicated, and that included youth sports groups and my adult sports teams and whatnot. So it's a lot. And I realized that it was too much because I was using it as probably a procrastination buffer against doing real actual work that's distasteful or unpleasing, like log notes. But also it serves as I think for most of us, and I'll center myself on this, as a proxy for intimacy with human relationship. So as much as I know and like you guys, we've never actually met in person. You two have, but I have not met you guys. And we talk incessantly. We talk every day, throughout the day, from morning till dark, about all topics. And you're not the only text thread I have about that. And they're all groups of guys who are all very good fellows, but they all bring something different to the table. And I was like, this is too much. And what really struck me was over the last couple of months, I've started to pull back on weekends because I want to be present with my family and not distracted by the devices that I'm distracted with Monday through Friday. And I'd look at my phone on mid-Saturday or something, and I hadn't looked at it since Friday evening. And there's my group threads. It's like 23 missed messages, 57 missed messages, 92 missed messages, 12 missed messages. I'm like, I can't possibly catch up. I'll be standing in the kitchen staring at my phone while my kids are wanting to go out and throw the ball around while I'm catching up on conversation that really involves nothing practical in my life. So I think the mental acrobatics that made me keep that up were some sort of something loyalty to friends and something I need to keep abreast of current events or whatever. And I just lost myself in it. So I realized if I was going to be one of those guys who's, trumpeting the work of Jonathan Haidt and asking people to leave their devices, at the side and all that stuff, then I probably should be walking out myself. And I've got more to say about that, but I'm going to put a cork in it for now because I have to cough because my cold has settled into my chest.
So I can hop in there. So first of all, I grabbed this sticker because I was like, because Jake was kind enough to send some, and also because I'm at work, and it's a education agency, and I'm not a marshal or a guardian, so I can't hold a gun up on this podcast. That would be highly frowned upon where I am
Not like
right
you
now.
can at home.
But yes, I can as much as possible at home. It's great, but this is the closest I could get, and I was like, hey, this is also repping a bro's significant, important effort at suicide prevention that's 2A friendly. So I was like, I can bring the word in if I can't bring the real thing. That's why I have that sitting here. Um, and so what I was um, saying to Jake in the pregame part of the discussion is the I'm I like I don't know how you were doing it. You know, Jake has
Poorly is the answer.
well, there you go. But I have thought to just in discussions with Jake, I have noticed like it seems like he's involved in way more groups than I am. And so like I have the group that we are a part of, we have been a part of, and then I have like one other dude's thread that's kind of going all the time in similar fashion, but a little less frequently lately. And then and then just whatever other little social media. Um, and that's I couldn't do more than that. That would just drive me crazy. And so, I mean, I think it's a really good impulse to rein in um and I just like I would have gone dysfunctional like a while ago if I had much more to deal with. I don't even like to have two phones. I have two phones at work, and I just ignore the desk phone because I have it forward to my cell phone, which would bother some people. I don't get many after hours calls, so that's not a big deal. Um, but it's just you get too many channels of communication coming in. I think the human brain just cannot process all of it, and we just start dropping stuff. And so, when Jake let us know that he was going to be leaving our thread, for a while or for a long time or indefinitely, I was like, dude, I'm not offended by that, because I can't imagine taking on more than what I've got, and I think there are healthy limits. Like at night, if I want to be with my family and just watch a movie and actually pay attention to the movie, I have to put my phone in the other room. Like I put it a room away from me. Or if I'm at work and I really want to get things like I want to sit down and I really want to hammer out some important project or something, it goes in a drawer that that's outside of my immediate reach. Like I have to roll my chair back and open the drawer to get it. And it's like after I spend a certain amount of time, not very long, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes disconnected from it, I quit thinking about it. And it frees up a lot of bandwidth, and kind of restores some focus. And so, that's kind of how I've handled that, um, in the past. And something else Jake was saying in the pregame that I'd want to highlight with this discussion is the idea that online everything seems like on X everything seems important. Like there's so many important discussions going on, and it's some like there's a meme or there's a news story that's just like earth shaking, and meanwhile we could walk up and down our street and we would be the only people on our street who knew anything about who those people were or what that story was. And the significance of that is um, illusory. That's not it's not real in the world, and I think that is a very important truth to remember and to kind of reground ourselves in the inundation of all that stuff. So I just wanted to highlight that because I thought that was a really good point, and I have thought about shutting down X or leaving X at different times, and having a similar thought of like it's not affecting my neighbors, it's not affecting my relationship with my neighbors for this stuff to be there.
I for me, like I try to put this in the perspective of like as a Christian man, my number one goal in life should be the Great Commission. And I think for me personally, like underneath that, number one subheading is help people with addiction and mental health issues. And number two, I would say is challenge bad ideas that are causing harm, right? Like I think those are legitimate, parts of my calling. But like I recently deleted Instagram. It was bringing nothing to my life. Like it was just sucking me away from the valuable parts of my life. And so often, whether it's like X, it's generally X, it's like I might be deep in the comments section, like reading things that have like none of this has any benefit to my life. None of this is benefiting anyone else in my life. Like I'm just wasting time,
And it's not just wasting time. It's actually deleterious to your mental processes. I mean, there's that old phrase that says, you are what you eat. We're also psychologically, we are what we intake into our psyches. So whatever we're consuming, we will become. If it's bitter, cynical, negative, we're going to become bitter, cynical, and negative. If it's happy puppies and, dog rescue stories, we're going to become pretty happy also. So, we got to be mindful of that. But you bring up an interesting point here, and to the listening audience, like I'm working through this really for the first time. It's been a long time coming, but this revelation seems newer to me than just any other hiatus I've taken or any other Sabbath I've taken from digital media or whatever. And so, pardon me if I ramble, but the idea of addiction, I think, is one that's worth exploring because, and hat tip to Patrick Lockwood. He will say that anything that's not a substance that causes euphoria is not an addiction, it's a compulsion. And I think there's an argument to be made there for sure. I don't care to die on any hills. I think it's a worthwhile discussion, but I'm just going to use common parlance of digital media addiction, writ broadly for the purposes here. And I think there's an addiction that goes into where we distract ourselves, and then we have to dig a little deeper. Okay, we got the what. Now what's the why? The why is probably intimacy avoidance. And for me, it's an avoidance of my own family, my wife, maybe self-exploration. And I think that the driving factor behind it for years and years and years was just deep insecurity. And this isn't news. Maybe it's news to you guys, but it's not news to me or my inner circles. But the idea that, dating back to even undergrad, which is now 25, 6, 7 years ago, it's 28 years ago. I immersed myself in all the campus activities that I could find. And I thought it was good and awesome and wholesome. And it probably on the whole was. Student government, fraternity, campus involvement, intramural sports, all that stuff. Like there wasn't much I didn't do as an undergrad. But in retrospect, I was trying to find myself. I was running toward anything that looked like it would welcome me. And it turns out I'm competent at most things I try. And so, of course, everybody's going to be like, Jake, this is awesome. Welcome to our organization or whatever. And so that fed my ego. It didn't necessarily feed my true self. And out of that, I began a pattern of homeostatic, I won't call it chaos because it was very orderly, and I definitely prioritized and I did everything pretty well. I didn't fail at anything. I didn't drop what I was trying to carry, for the most part. But it began a pattern of homeostatic activity, I think, that then sustained for many, many years. I was constantly working multiple jobs, multiple activities, multiple community sports, multiple endeavors, philanthropic or otherwise, volunteer or whatever, for forever. And then, Jonathan said something earlier about how it sounded, he wasn't sure how I could do all this. And there was a time in my life when I was running Zephyr Wellness, chairing my licensing board, rewriting most of our state laws that govern our profession, mentoring and supervising interns and students, doing Noggin Notes podcast, doing the community boards and coalitions and committees. People would ask, like, how do you do all this? And I'm like, I don't know, power not of myself. Like, I just thought it was the Holy Spirit working through me. But it was absolutely at the cost of my relationship with my wife. And we drifted for a while, and we're good now, which is great. But it got really rocky there a few years ago. And so I was self-feeding on this supply of ego-driven outputs, right? Like I would look around and be like, all this stuff is really good for the community or whatever. and most of it was self-sacrificial. Like I didn't earn a whole bunch of money. God, I wish I had. Things would be better now. I didn't earn a whole bunch of money. I didn't get a bunch of street cred. I guess you got a nice resume out of it, but that and $6 will buy you a cup of coffee. But it was all just insecurity. It was to paper over what I didn't want to see deep in my inside. Okay, so I leave all that behind. I resigned from a bunch of the boards and coalitions and committees and all that stuff back in circa 2023. And what did I do? I added a bunch of group chats. Like it's just constant, perpetual addiction to distraction. And I can still do the mental acrobatics of saying, I'm helping these guys. We're all leaning in on each other. Iron sharpens iron. I could cite scripture, right? All the good things. And yet still, I don't know that it was pure of heart in my purpose and my drive to do so. I think it was just still default. So now this is yet another evolution of Jake's ongoing self-introspection to say, what really do I need to do, and where should I put my time and my talents and my effort and my energy? Because, finding oneself is a lifelong journey. And I think this is just another step. So thank you for not taking offense at me pulling out of the group chat. I will probably return at some point because it is valuable and I do enjoy your guys' conversations. It was just way too much. And I recognized it was yet another iteration of that thing that I'd been doing for now going on 30 years. And the exploration continues. I hope I will continue learning. So I'll conclude by saying this, though. It wasn't just an epiphany. I woke up one day and saw a bunch of missed chats that I didn't want to scroll back and read. It was a combination of listening to other people do the same thing. I heard Charlie Kirk posthumously in one of his reels that are now surfacing saying that he observed the traditional Sabbath of Friday night to Saturday night, no phone. He'd put his phone away. Rachel Hawk on Noggin Notes talked about she has a 4 p.m. shut off on her phone. My friend Christian Conte, take a drink, would say, just because I don't write at something funny you send doesn't mean I didn't read it. I'm just moving on, right? There are limits that people set. Josh Slocum has often said, don't be offended if I don't respond to your stuff. I do read it, but I'm just really busy. So I'm like, holy cow, these other people are putting limits in place. Why am I compelled to respond to everything that somebody posts? And then I had to look at the content that was being posted, and a lot of it was just rage bait, distraction about why the world's going to hell in a handcart.
Yeah, I think it's very, very respectable. I think it's a good example to set for our families, for clients to do that kind of self-limitation. And so let me just,
sorry, real quick there.
Yeah,
you bring up a good point. Like I'm teaching my students and my interns and my staff that when you hit the light switch on the wall, when you leave work, you're done. Don't look back. Don't open your computer. Don't do your log notes. Your log notes should be done. If, whatever, days get crazy and you have to do them at night, okay, fine. But don't make a habit of it, right? And then here I am willfully violating my own policy and then doing, again, some mental gymnastics to make it make sense. Like, well, the boss never really stops working. It's like, that's not good. Like, would you want to go to a church where the pastor willfully violates one of the 10 commandments all the time? He's like, just don't take a Sabbath because, pastor duties.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of rationale doesn't hold up very well. I was just going to point out that as one little more like summary point, you notice that your change had been a first order change.
Good point.
You had taken frantic activity of one type and had, with very good intention, made a shift, but then somewhat unexpectedly ended up with a different kind of frantic activity that filled the void there. And I feel like now you're saying I don't want to do a first order change on that. I want something more significant in the long run. And it doesn't mean I won't ever do any of the things I was doing before, but it's going to be structured differently.
Well, I had a conversation a couple of years ago about the same time that I was resigning from all these boards with a guy here in the community. His name's Mike Worm, WURM, but clever, fun name anyway. He's headed up our Boys and Girls Club for many, many years. And he's very good at it. And he's a really, really good guy. But I took him on as kind of a mentor, so to speak. And he's a little bit older. And he said, as you throttle down, there's a couple things. Beware, you're going to end up replacing those those activities with something. I said,
Uh,
yeah, it's going to be family, right? No, I was lying to myself. It ended up becoming this. But the other thing he says is like, once you throttle down, you don't ever want to throttle back up again. And he pulled that from somewhere else. Recommended a really good book by Arthur Brooks called "From Strength to Strength" as you move from one stage of your career or life into another.
mm,
So I would recommend that to the audience too, and you guys. Um, but the point is, once you throttle down, you can't throttle back up. And I think unconsciously, I just didn't want to throttle down. So I replaced my activities, my busyness, with these ongoing, consultation groups, we'll call them, and it's really hard to say no. And then spiritually, I think that if I'm really trying, and I do believe I'm honestly endeavoring to get closer to God by turning down the volume and diminishing the stimulus in my world, of course the enemy is going to rear his head, and of course he's going to step in and try to separate me from that end goal by introducing. I mean, I got a text from a guy I hadn't talked to in 12 years, probably 10 years, maybe,
uh,
asking for therapy, for him and his partner. And I obliged, like I made the referral, but I was like, man, there's a lot of those that just
mm,
like, oh, I haven't talked to you in a while. Now you want to talk to me. Probably because I just made this declaration to go a different direction. Right. So
mhm,
it's good. I'm glad to be able to help people, but I think I have to be mindful of where that temptation lies, because it could on the surface look like a good and holy and righteous thing to do. But if my goal is to connect better with my wife and my kids, and my business and the people I'm mentoring, like right under my own roof, I can't be
mm,
spread out across the country. That doesn't work.
yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, as I understand it, there are some proposed changes in the world of marriage and family therapy. What can you guys tell me about that?
So I guess about a month ago, we had kind of an open public comment window for AAMFT members. And I'll be clear, I'm not a current AAMFT member. I'm a former one, but I still get all the emails, and I think they still think of me as part of them. And we've discussed that a little bit kind of on our side chat at times, that it seems like AAMFT likes to claim that all people with LMFT or any variation of that after their name are under their umbrella. But I don't claim them currently
Should
because of
probably
the
define that
direction that they've
acronym,
headed. Oh, well, thank you.
Jonathan.
Appreciate that. Yes, always need to do that. The American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy is what AAMFT stands for, and that is our nationwide professional organization that represents marriage and family therapists. Um, anybody wanting to seek continuing education, supervision certification in marriage and family therapy at some point has had some contact with AAMFT.
It seems like, from what I can tell, like regardless of if you're a member or not, with AAMFT, American Counseling Association, American Psychological Association, National Association of Social Work, regardless of whether you're a member or not, these are the behemoths in the field that basically control everything, like whether you consent to that or not.
Yes,
Yeah,
and just to draw another connection, it's more people are familiar with the APAs. Well, this is our APA for our subfield. It's they do public advocacy for laws and policies, provide
allegedly.
legal guidance, allegedly, yes, allegedly, depending on how you define those terms. And this is a fairly regular thing for revisions of ethical codes or rules to be brought up. And in this case, it's the AAMFT Code of Ethics that was up for proposed changes. And so I spent a good bit of time reading and reviewing and writing a response to the current proposed changes, but also kind of the global landscape of marriage and family therapy and how kind of messy things have gotten. Um, and this is kind of an angle I figured we would get into on this topic today. That the if you just read the Code of Ethics by itself in the new proposed version, it looks really nice, like for the most part. There's a few, kind of concerning bits, a few bits about, well, could this be used to squelch free speech of members who were not aligned with a particular political view. Maybe there's maybe some concerns about like the strength of the guidance related to AI in therapy, and what all the implications of that are, or at least the clarity of that. But mostly, there's not a ton of objectionable stuff in the code itself. But then if you look at the other materials that have been put out by LMFT in the last 10 to 15 years, you start to see some, I do, and I think Jake would agree, you start to see a lot of dissonance between the way that the code of ethics is worded and what the real expectations are when you're having conversations with colleagues about like how we conduct ourselves out there. And so one example would be the guidelines on gender affirming care, which Jake blew my mind when he pointed out a while back that the code of ethics that governs the entire profession is maybe only about 11 pages long, if I remember right, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jake. And the gender affirming care guidelines, which is a totally separate document, is something like 26 pages long.
Correct.
And you go, what the heck is going on with that? Why do we have an 11-page document that's governing our entire profession and all of our activities global? And then we have this specialized document that seems to be intended to function somewhat like a code of ethics, like guiding our professional practice, that is very ideological and has tons of politicization wrapped up in itself. And so just as kind of an intro to my view on this, the landscape of this is that the 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 organization is potentially putting its members in a double bind, because the code of ethics is kind of nice and flowery and is unobjectionable, but then there's all these other kind of documents and guidelines and expectations that have nothing to do with the code of ethics itself in terms of publication, but that there's tremendous pressure put on providers to adhere to. And double binds are bad. That's just for the listening audience, that's where you get a conflicting message where the nonverbal message is a yes and the verbal message is a no, or vice versa. Like you get stuck between a rock and a hard place, or you're in a pickle. It's that kind of idea. I think most of the members don't experience it that way. I think they don't experience the dissonance that's there. But man, if you do see it, it's a major turnoff. And it's very frustrating to look at it and see the direction. Like there's no course correction, in this revision that I can see.
I will say that admittedly, the gender affirming care guidelines, 13 of those pages are references.
Oh my gosh.
And like, one page is the cover title and one page is the table of contents. But the point is it's equivalent. And
Yeah.
What are they referencing? Are they referencing like WPATH?
that's 13 pages worth of references, dude. It's academic fluff is what it is. There's a lot of self-aggrandizing, a lot of virtue signaling, a lot of circular reasoning, and self-feeding, so it's like the whole thing is a walking logical fallacy, if you ask me, because it just self-references. It's good because we say it's good, and that's why it's good. I'm like, okay. That, by the way, is a real begging the question. The way that the announcers say it in sports events is not the proper use of begging the question. What they mean to say is raising the question. But so to me, I don't even want to talk about that because it's just a terrible document that invents terminology prima facie because they say so, and it's just dumb. It's intellectually dishonest. But the ethical codes are an interesting beast because, as you alluded, it does try to bind anybody with the license, right? So for people who are uninitiated, maybe if you're a student or a new grad, or maybe you've been working in the field for a while and you just haven't wrapped your head around this, I'll outline it real briefly. Every state issues its own version of a license, and those licenses can span multiple professional disciplines. And I'm trying to be as broad as I can because I'm going to boil this down and distill it real quick, but you'll have professional counseling under one umbrella. marriage and family therapy under another umbrella, social work under an umbrella, and then under that umbrella, you'll have like 5 different social work types, one of which is clinical, drug and alcohol counseling or substance abuse counseling under another umbrella, and then psychologists under another umbrella, and then psychiatrists under the medical doctor umbrella. And usually these are all different licensing boards. Some of them are one licensing board, depending on the state you're in. Some of them have autonomy. Some of them are combined. So, for example, in Nevada, the professional counselors and the marriage and family therapists are under one licensing board. Social workers have their own. Substance abuse has its own, but also includes gambling, which would make Patrick Lockwood's head pop off his shoulders and roll down the hill, because gambling is not an addiction; it's a compulsion. And then psychologists have their own board, and then there's the medical doctor board, and then there's the nursing board, which takes care of the advanced practice nurses, which can also do psychotherapy, because we're all mental health people. We're talking about this in a mental health context. So different boards. Now, if you travel to different parts of the country, professional counseling can be called something else. So in Nevada, they're called clinical professional counselors, CPCs. Elsewhere, they're mostly called LPCs, licensed professional counselors. And then in the Eastern Seaboard, they're called mental health counselors, which is the equivalent license. So if you're seeking reciprocity licensure somewhere, like in Nevada, if you're coming from New Hampshire and you're called a mental health counselor there, you come to Nevada, we call you a CPC in Nevada if you get a Nevada license. So you could be called 2 different things in 2 different parts of the country, but it all means the same. And what the licensing boards do is they will often point to the professional associations that most closely align with the professional credential. So if you're an LPC or a CPC or an MHC, for example, the licensing board in the various states might point to in its laws and say, for our ethical consideration, we have adopted by reference into law. So they're referencing the professional association's codes, and they're adopting them by reference into law, meaning everybody who's got a license under this certain thing has to adhere to this certain ethical code. And then they've got a variety of professional associations to choose from, one of which is the American Counseling Association, ACA. That's a very popular one. One of which Nevada has picked, which is the NBCC, the National Board for Certified Counselors. And then there's the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapists. So in Nevada, we've chosen to adopt all 3 for everyone who has a license from the same board, even though there's only 2 licenses in Nevada. So if you run afoul of a code, you wonder which code. And then this gets really sticky, because if you're in a state like Nevada that has adopted by reference these codes, and you're not a member of the organization, I think there's an argument to be made that says something approximating, hey, state, I didn't sign on to this private organization because I object to how they run things, or I object to various ways that they run, or whatever. You don't get to compel me into somebody else's ethical code. You should make your own code, state of Nevada, if you want to. Now, somebody bearing my resemblance and sounding a lot like me may or may not have at one point offered to write a state of Nevada code of ethics for our licensed professionals, but that was roundly rejected. It was very hard work and nobody really wanted to do it anyway. But somebody said, no, it's fine the way it is. Well, where I got my motivation for that was actually, it turns out, the state of Texas, because I believe the state of Texas actually has its own ethics codes, and it doesn't point to the private organizations by reference. It actually has a state of Texas, or Republic of Texas, as you will, code of ethics for the professionals. So I think that's probably a cleaner, better way to go. The counter argument is that if you're signing on for the license from the state, you are therefore signing on to all the legal requirements thereto pertaining, which would be the adoption by reference. The question is, if I'm not a member of ACA and I'm not a member of AAMFT, but I am a member of NBCC, do I abide by that? Or because I have a marriage and family therapist license, am I beholden to the AAMFT ethical code? Nobody really knows until somebody files a suit or complains about files a complaint, and then the complaint is appealed all the way up to a judicial review, and then a judge will decide. But nobody really knows. So we do the best we can to track as closely as we can, and it really is clean and honorable to do the most frontward facing position that we can for the consuming audience, so that they know how to hold us accountable. So if Jake has a marriage and family therapist license, then he probably should be held to the AAMFT ethical codes, even if he doesn't want to belong to the organization for whatever reasons Jake decides. And now I'm done referring to myself in third person.
For now. You're welcome to later. It's kind of fun when you do. Um, so I just add one clarifying point, and it's nothing big. Those licenses that Jake was referring to, a vast majority or would be considered like a master's level clinician, with the exception of obviously your psychiatry, nursing, and
Clinical
psychology, which
psychology.
generally requires a doctoral degree. You will have people with doctorates in some subfield of psychology who also have an LPC rather than like a licensed psychologist or a school psychologist professional
You,
credential.
you can
So,
also have some states like West Virginia that only require a master's degree in psychology to become a licensed psychologist in that state. And that's where we
oh,
get some friction among various states about reciprocity and why PsyPact, for those of you who are interested in PsyPact or know about it, it's a compact of various states where they all recognize each other's licenses so you can practice across state lines. And they won't acknowledge states like West Virginia because they're like, well, you're not as good as we are because we did the doctoral program. And then there's a fight over whether or not the PhD or the EDD or the PsyD is good enough. And so there's this
mm,
big battle, and it's not for nothing. I mean, there's some fidelity to be considered across
mm.
the different professions, but for one state to argue that it does it better somehow than another state, like lacking empirical evidence, that argument falls short for me because
It's
Nevada
a
is one
little
of those
silly.
states that thinks it does it better, but we rank dead last in everything you don't want to rank dead last in. So I think Nevada trying to hold the line on like, no, how dare you, California, come into our state and practice without going through our process? Like, I
Mm.
don't know, you're 50th. I don't know if you can make that argument.
Oh no. Jake, as you were talking through that, I had thought it might be good to lay out just some thought process about why it's frustrating to people who have kind of shucked the organization, over disgruntlement or frustration. And I can just like briefly tell my personal experience of that. So I was in grad school from 2008 to 2010, and we were encouraged to attend. I attended a double AMFT in Sacramento in what that probably was 2009. Um, that was
You
my
mean a
first
meeting or convention or
national
something? Oh,
conference.
okay.
National conference. They had it in Sacramento that year. That would have been this, I think, the fall of my second year probably that we attended that. Because it always happens. It's usually around this time of year, I think, if I remember right. Um, and at that time, you would go and you would hear like Sue Johnson, the founder of EFT, get up there and talk about EFT emerging research as a keynote, and you would hear from, oh gosh, who else would I have heard from? Michelle Weiner Davis, who's a really big marriage and family researcher, or Monica McGoldrick, who was a direct student of Murray Bowen. And these were these are innovators in the field who were developing treatment modalities and expanding them, and generally just encouraging the advancement of the practice of marriage and family therapy. Um, Over the years, the content of the sessions changed. So between, say, 2009 and 2018, you slowly started to see some of this critical and gender theory content make its way in. There was very little in 2009, like in the terms of the sessions, even the breakout sessions. It was almost non-existent in my experience of going. And I attended at least 5 or 6 of the national conferences between those years. Um, by 2018, they had the conference in Austin. That was my last year to attend, and that was my last year to be an active member of AAMFT, because 2 out of 3 of the keynotes were critical theory type authors who were talking about the, problematizing and whiteness and white privilege, and no clinical reference, no innovation in the field, no kind of honoring or revering the history of the people who had come before who helped establish this field for us. It felt alien to me. And so in 2018, when 2 out of 3 of the keynotes were critical theory, the other was actually quite good. It was a kind of a public speaker type guy. But the others, golly, I couldn't stand to see that loss of kind of central purpose that had seemed to be there before. And I remember that year, kind of the breaking point for me in that conference of just deciding not to be a part of it anymore. I was in a breakout session, and it was, first of all, it was poorly labeled for what they were actually doing, because there was no like signaling that it was going to be like a major gender theory, critical theory acceptance kind of session, but that's what it was. And there was somebody from the East Coast, just a regular attendee, a participant who was sitting there, and she was white. And that's only important because of the story she told, because she was explaining that her son was in distress and that she was worried for him because he was racked with guilt over the color of his skin and how he just wanted his friends, who were people of color or who were women or who were, under the LGBT, et cetera, umbrella, to know that he really cared about them and that he never wanted them to be offended and that he never wanted to be upsetting to them. And he just felt so guilty. And she was like, well, what can be done for my son? And the presenter, I'm going to be honest, I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was kind of like, "Oh, good, amen, sister," and like he's doing what he should do, because these people have a right to feel all these ways that they feel about how they've been treated historically, and there was no concession made at all for that, for that clinician's child's mental health or negative impact. And I'm hearing these concepts being described, and I'm like, this is emotional fusion. It's a severe lack of emotional differentiation that you're literally describing. And why am I the only one sitting in this room that is like skin crawling
It seems
about what's being
abusive.
said? What's that?
It seems abusive.
I would agree. And so when I left that conference, I wrote a tersely worded letter, because that's what you do when you get upset these days. I filled out the evaluation, and I tried to scathe whoever read that into realizing that this is not what our professional identity has been traditionally. It is such a far departure, and you have to ignore what our professional identity has been, what our foundational theories are, in order to hold the positions that were espoused by a majority of speakers at this conference. And so, just totally blown away by that. So when I said earlier, it mentioned, the idea that I haven't seen a course correction. That's really the course correction that I want to see, is a return to our professional identity and a recognition that, oh, guys, maybe we went too far into this stuff, and it's really starting to replace and supplant innovation and pursuit of high quality practice of marriage and family therapy. And it's just, it's frustrating. It's frustrating as somebody who has been extremely proud of my professional identity. It 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 made me see things in a totally different way. It made me a more confident person. It it gave me so many gifts, and it's infuriating to see it just desecrated. And that's what I feel like has happened. So I'll pause for a second and let y'all jump in.
I I wanted to say, like, until I met you, Jonathan, I really had no respect for family therapy, and the reason was because I took I guess I probably took a total of 3 marriage and family therapy classes for electives. And one, the professor was just really lazy, and really the only thing that got hammered home is you need to have far left wing politics. And so I'm just like, I guess, the family stuff, this, systemic stuff, like it must be synonymous with critical theory, I guess. So it's not for me. And I took another one where, I mean, we're reading like The Ethical Slut, where you need to have a polyamorous marriage and open relationship. So this is like my understanding of family therapy. Like, what you're saying is like sounds very much in line with these type of organizations. And then I started hearing from you. Right now I'm reading through Sue Johnson, the EFT book, and I'm really liking it. My job at the rehab, we do a lot of IFS stuff, and I really like a lot of that. A lot of it's really useful. There seems to be like these two different worlds that almost don't interact, of like useful family therapy that actually helps people, and indoctrination that's just based on political obsessions.
I would say that that's a pretty accurate read on the dissonance that I was talking about earlier. It's to me, it's two different compartments of thinking. And I think it really is for the people who are, kind of above their eyebrows in it, who are just inundated in it. I and I see it, and I don't understand how there isn't awareness of how different those thought processes are or have to be. I'm really glad. I'm really glad that you have gotten into reading some of the good material out there. Sue Johnson wasn't very widely liked. She's actually a psychologist. She wasn't a marriage and family therapist, but we were the first ones that loved her and brought her kind of into our fold. And so she's a psychologist, but we think of her as one of us. I'm speaking for Jake a little bit, but that's kind of how it felt. She was one of the first speakers I ever heard out loud. She came to the Texas conference at the very first one that I attended. We were required to attend the Texas conference. There's just so much richness in the history and so much innovation, and so many of the therapy models that are now practiced as mainstay therapy models were marriage and family therapy models. Just amazing brilliance and innovation that happened in the last half of the 20th century in regard to treatment approaches and modalities and theoretical constructs. And so I don't know if you want to jump in, Jake. I kind of have a thought for a direction we could go on that kind of highlights what I'm talking about, but I don't want to hog the mic.
Yeah, I just want to share my own story about why I haven't been a member since 2018, and it's because mine's very different. Mine had to do with some chicanery at the national level. I was as involved as I could have been as a person doing too many spinning plates in circa 2016 to 2018. But what ended up happening was I was really, really unhappy about this. The National Association decided that it was going to float some bylaw changes to eliminate all the state level chapters in 2016ish.
Mm-hmm.
And and I had to go back in my email and pull it up because I still couldn't remember the rationale, but it was something we're 35% of LMFTs clinical fellows are 65 years of age or beginning to retire. This quote unquote aging out trend is a major concern for our division, LMFT and divisions, as the loss of members significantly impacts the ability to protect and advance the profession. Last year, over 64% of AAMFT's divisions encountered deficit spending, legal or management challenges, and/or reported volunteer fatigue, further increasing our vulnerabilities. This is from then President Mervyn Oliver, EDD, September of 2016. To our local chapter. I mean, the writing was on the wall. They wanted to eliminate all the state chapters. So they issued this survey and we all took it. And from what I gathered, the temperature was nobody wanted to get rid of their local chapters. And that's exactly what ended up happening. It came down that they hired some, I don't know, Ide Bailey or some major accounting firm to oversee the process. And we needed 75% of the vote. And sure enough, 75.8% of the vote came in and said, we're eliminating all the chapters. We're centralizing authority in Indianapolis. And that was it. And they had no plans for replacing the lobbying efforts at the state levels. They had no plans for how to grow the profession with this quote unquote aging out. It was just very authoritarian, very dogmatic, very top down. You will do what we say, and oh, by the way, here's a cookie to go along with it to make you think that you actually participated in the process. So I was like, well, I'm not sending my money to Indianapolis when none of it gets returned to Nevada anyway. And I had a back and forth with then executive director Tracy Todd, who told me essentially, sorry, Charlie, but you're out of touch. Most chapters are not like Nevada and California. And I'm like, thanks for lumping us in with California, who hasn't had an AAMFT chapter since like I don't know, God was a kid, because they also realized California is the birth of the marriage and family therapist, by the way. And
It
so
is.
they had more marriage and family therapists in California than the rest of the nation combined. And so they were like, we're tired of your shenanigans. And they pulled the plug in, like, I'm making stuff up, maybe 2004, 2005, something like that. It had been a while. And
Mm-hmm.
they formed CAMFT, the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. And they just did their own thing, because they're like, you need us more than we need you. So
Mm-hmm.
they just form their own thing. And I proposed back in 2016 to our then Nevada chapter. I said, I think it's time for us to just form our own association, because these people are Looney Tunes. Well, 1 year later in 2017, the vote came down, and then January 1, 2018, no more state chapters. I was like, I saw it. I called it. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
listens to me, but maybe now they will. So
Yeah.
that's why
So
I stopped being a member, because I didn't like the way that things were going. And then I've watched from afar as like you say, the ideology shifted from, we should be pushing family systemic viewpoints, in our treatment, to we should be pushing social justice in our treatment. And I found that very distasteful. But I was already not a member, so it's like, how much does my voice really matter? But my underlying theory about all this is that the marriage and family therapist, as you correctly pointed out, did a lot to move the field of psychotherapy forward from individual care to systemic oriented care. And they should rightly take credit with that shift in viewpoint from the old fashioned psychoanalysis, person on the couch, turned away from the analyst, the veiled clinician type of thing. Rogers moved the needle quite a bit, but also
mhm.
all the people who contributed from the Palo Alto Institute and forward. What ended up happening, like, again, if you're not familiar with the dynamics, I'm going to try to not, talk so much inside baseball here, but you'd be hard pressed to go find clinical work in the talk therapy realm anywhere where somebody doesn't think systemically. Social workers think systemically. Drug and alcohol people think systemically. We're not islands as people. We're all connected to what we would call holons, which is a HOLON, which is like
Mm-hmm.
a network of things around us influencing us, right? You got your family, you got your job, you got your social activities, you got whatever, right? And then family of origin, and then future dreams and aspirations and all this stuff, and culture writ large, and governments. So all these things are connected in almost in a cluster, like you do a brainstorming cluster in elementary school. And there's you at the center, but you're spoked out on all these different influences. Everybody thinks like that now. They didn't in the 70s and the
Mm-hmm.
60s and the 50s, right? Now everybody does. And I think truly the AMFT, much like most of these social justice organizations that we see these days, has effectively worked itself out of a job. Like, why do we have trans rights activists pushing as hard as they are? It's because they need something to do. We got gay rights taken care of. Like, marriage is legal everywhere now for same-sex couples. Like, so instead of being proud and letting go, it's like they have to pick a fight. And I think the marriage and family therapist did the same thing. It's like, dude, man, you're done. You did it. Everybody thinks systemically now. Stop trying to corner the market. Stop trying to mudsling at other professionals. I mean, I don't know if your experience was like this, but when I went through school, and I know it's still the same from the students that I host here at Zephyr, um, they openly trash talk other clinicians' credentials as lesser than. Now, they don't trash talk clinicians individually. They just trash talk the credential. Like, psychologists only know how to do testing. They don't know how to do therapy. Social workers only know how to get resources. They don't know how to do therapy. Professional counselors can't think systemically. They only think individually. They don't know how to do therapy. And on and on and on and on. And it's really, really frustrating, because then I come out in the real world and I meet some of these people who are fabulous clinicians with different credentials and post-nominal letters. And I'm like, this doesn't compute with what I was told in the classroom. And then I get to my licensing board and I start reaching out to these other professionals and saying, hey, we got to solve some stuff in our state. Can we all work together? And they're like, we thought you'd never ask. I'm like, what do you mean you thought I'd never ask? It's like, well, you people are the ones holding up the cart. We're like, we're all on the same page here. We're trying to row together. You're dropping anchor. I was like, oh, it's my people. Okay. So it's like this weird insecurity among the MFT community that thinks that they just have to keep digging their heels in, and like this whole protect the profession nonsense. I mean, if you go to the AMFT website, there's 4 things you can click on. It's like, who are we? How do we join? Protect the profession, and latest research or something like that. It's like protect the profession. It's like, what do you mean the profession of talk therapy? No. The profession of marriage and family therapy. It's like, come on, man. Shouldn't you be lobbying Congress to make sure that insurance companies reimburse us at an adequate rate? Like, that would be a good start. Let's go to CMS and get us adequately compensated. It shouldn't have taken 24 years, which it did, because in 2024 was the first year that marriage and family therapists and professional counselors were allowed to bill Medicare. It shouldn't have taken 24 years and 14 attempts to get us in network with Medicare. That's where your efforts should have been, not this, like, I don't know, throwing sand at each other in the sandbox, turf warring. It's ridiculous. So that's distasteful. I don't like that. I wish they would just bring back, some of the research that you mentioned, and, maybe give a hat nod or a hat tip or a nod to the Gottmans, for doing as much as they did with couples therapy. They're not marriage and family therapists either.
No.
And
we kind of have claimed them to some degree too. I don't know that they would claim us, but
until I, with my licensing board in 2019, made an adjustment to our state laws, the John and Julie Gottman would not be able to do couples and family work in the state of Nevada. By law, they were prohibited. Unless you were an MFT, you couldn't do couples work in the state of Nevada. Well, the psychologists could because they're a different board. The social workers could because they're a different board. The psychiatrists could because they're a different board. But those lowly CPCs who were under the same board as the MFTs, they couldn't do it, right? So there's this weird, like, just turf warring protectionism that just doesn't make any sense. Meanwhile, actual people are suffering and they'd like to, see us in our offices.
Let me draw an interesting parallel to the kind of turf warring that you're talking about, which is the kind of the interdenominational church debates that took place all over the country in the early 20th century, where the Church of Christ, I'm a Church of Christ kid, so the Church of Christ kids were like, we're the only ones that have the correct baptism, and so if you got baptism in a Baptist church, I'm sorry for you, that you're going to burn in hell unless you come to our church, and then we dunk you, and then you're good. And then meanwhile, many of the others were kind of in the same sort of adversary, like, no, you're with those Church of Christ kids. No, they believe this. That's totally wrong. Here's the proof text that shows it, and just being caught up in this denominational sectarian back and forth that lingered a long time beyond when it was useful for society. And this is something that is well understood in general systems theory, that a system or a subsystem tends to perform the same function over and over again, many times beyond its usefulness, until some kind of feedback loop, some kind of corrective energy comes back in and pushes it back the other direction. And this is yet another thing that I think is just wild to me. I don't think LMFT would like the comparison that I just drew between them and a kind of not maybe a light religious fundamentalism.
Yeah, for sure.
Reactivity. But that's kind of what it's been.
They just don't have the receptiveness to draw comparisons, I don't think. And again, like, here I am bashing on an organization that I'm not even a part of anymore, so it sounds a little weird and, maybe some sour grapes. But because they hold an outsized sway in our field, possibly without consent of the governed, I think it's worth criticizing. And when we promised people we would do some discussion on ethics, maybe we should shift that direction, because there are some changes upcoming that you and I had pinged back
before
and forth.
We get into that, like,
before we get into that,
like, so much of the social justice movement generally just, to me, feels like everything we're doing is to protect and support the marginalized, and then you kind of peel back one layer of that onion, and it's just different people with a power grab.
Well, you want my down and dirty 120 to 190 second
be controversial
overview on ethics. Okay, so if you want the longer version, it's in Noggin Notes, and I think we covered in Gun and Mental Health. But okay, so here's the deal. All of our ethical codes, and I hold the 11 pages in front of me from the 2012 to 2015 comparison, all of our ethical codes in the counseling profession, and really medicine broadly, I think would probably be comfortable with this. They come from 5 ethical precepts. So these ethical precepts form the foundation from which the codes spring forth to give more precision. So they are, in no particular order, autonomy, justice, fidelity, non-maleficence, and beneficence. Definitionally, autonomy is respecting a person's ability to choose for him or herself whatever they choose, meaning they control their own behavior and choices. Fidelity is to honor the profession, to be faithful, right? It comes from Latin, fidelis, fidelity. So you're being faithful to what? The contract you sign with the patient, your ethics, your modalities, to be faithful to that. Justice, to act on behalf of somebody who needs it, to do the right thing in a given place and time, to be forthright. Non-maleficence, don't hurt anybody, and beneficence, help somebody, do some good, right? Help somebody. Non-maleficence also is known as first do no harm. You hear that sometimes. Okay, here's the deal. All 5 of those are supposed to hang in equal weight. There is no one that's better than another. There is no one that's more important than another. That's fine and good and well. However, you cannot advocate for one without inherently stepping on something else. So, for example, I cannot do justice without tromping on someone's autonomy. I don't care who the person is. It doesn't matter if it's a child or an adult. If I'm acting on behalf of a child, for example, by calling CPS because they're being abused at home, I am stepping on the child's autonomy. Now, you can make an argument that the child doesn't get autonomy because they're not of legal age of majority or whatever. That's fine. But I am stepping on his or her autonomy because I am the one doing the acting. If I go write a letter on behalf of somebody to a juvenile probation officer or a social worker or the court system in a custody dispute, I am acting out of a sense of justice from my perspective. I can articulate why, all that stuff, but I am inherently stepping on autonomy. Now, if I do help someone, if I'm acting beneficently, if I'm doing something beneficial, I am inherently stepping on autonomy. Now, I can do it with consent, right? We engage in treatment with consent, and they say, yes, I want you to help me. And I say, here's an idea. I think you should exercise a little bit more, and it'll probably clear up your bad mood. Okay. I have just given them something to do. Yes, I did it with consent, but they have sacrificed some autonomy. I have helped, possibly. I have to be careful about how far I take that help, because if I create a dependent relationship where I'm solving this person's problems forever and ever, then I've revoked their autonomy and taken it over. In fact, in so doing, I may have violated the ethical precept of non-maleficence, because I may be harming them by creating a dependent relationship. This is why I repeatedly say therapy in perpetuity is unethical. You should not and shall not treat somebody in perpetuity. There should be a time limitation to it. And I get the psychoanalysts will get all over me for that, saying that the journey to discovery of oneself is never ending. I get it. I also am trained in psychoanalysis. I get analytic psychology. I also know they're not the same. But that would be consultation. That's not therapy for a goal. An end goal should terminus. So the point is, I've thrown out a couple examples. I could go on and on and on and on. There is no way to advocate for one of those without stepping on another. And what the social justice movement has done is it's stepped on everybody's autonomy, because the clinician has now centered him or herself as the sole arbiter of what is good and holy and right for the person for whom they're acting in a sense of justice. Now we can I don't like adjective justice. I think justice is justice. You don't have to put an adjective in front of it. Our environmental justice and social justice and law, legal justice and criminal justice and all these justices, right?
Sans
just do the right
adjectives.
thing. Yeah. Adjective justice. Adjective justice is one of the other justices. There's noun justice and verb justice also, and conjunction justice, and you don't want conjunctivitis justice. That's pink eye. But the point is, if we're doing social justice, we're stepping on autonomy. And I think that's inherently unethical, because you're doing it usually without the consent of the person in the room. And there's the problem with the critical theories. They're presuming that the person in the room is incapable without the clinician's assistance. And I think that's just wrong for a whole bunch of reasons. And for that reason, I hold autonomy in a much higher place than the other 4, because I think it is the easiest to violate, because we're all soft-hearted people, and we see people in time of need. They're ailing, they're wounded, they need help. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in front of us. And so we want to help them. But man, we really have to respect that autonomy if they want to go out and continue doing the maladaptive behaviors that they're ostensibly in front of us to solve, we don't get to call them up on the weekends and be their accountability mate. That's a violation of that autonomy, and it breaches the ethical code. And I think, unfortunately, what's gone on right now is we've got an inversion of the ethical codes based on an inversion of the ethical precepts, because the people authoring them have elevated justice above everything else.
Hey, let me read number 1 of the proposed aspirational core values of the AAMFT Code of Ethics. Anybody want to guess what its content is? Number
Social
1,
justice.
the cultivation of an inclusive environment without prejudice and oppression, where equity, belonging, and mutual respect are intrinsic. That's
that
number 1.
sounds fine, right? On the surface, that sounds good.
But
I
that
think
wasn't
a
good
lot.
enough. But we didn't say it hard enough. And so then we're going to say, well, we're going to be responsive to excellence and service to members. But then we've got to come back in with number 3 and say diversity, equity, inclusion, and excellence in clinical practice, supervision, research, education, and administration. This is something that I had planned to bring up here today. Why do we need 2 diversity and equity statements in 6 total aspirational core values? And why are those the first and third when I think number 4, number 6 really should be the first? Distinctiveness, and this is number 4, distinctiveness and excellence in training of marriage and family therapists in systemic and relational therapies. It's
All the
the
stuff
4th one
about
down.
like equity, inclusion, those are I think to people who are not in our world where we're hearing those words and we know what they mean, and like that's just a common part of our, like we know what's going on. I think your typical person reads that, oh, that sounds nice. Well, I'm just gonna not even pay attention, just kind of gloss over that. You know what I mean? You have to really know what they mean when they say equity and inclusion and stuff.
Diversity means people who are not white, who are not in an oppressed, well, people are welcome who are not in these traditionally culturally dominant categories, right? So the worst thing to be in this view is a white male conservative, because those are the greatest oppressors in existence in history. If you talk to people who espouse the beliefs of critical theory and gender theory, etc.
I
Um,
would like to, oh,
Go ahead. No,
I was
please do.
going to say, I'd like to point out, because I'm holding the 2012 to 2015 ethical code comparison. In red, in 2015 is the additional core values that you just read off. They did not exist prior to 2015. They added them in 2015. The core values of
Interesting, isn't it?
LMFT embody acceptance, appreciation, and inclusion of a diverse membership. 2, distinctiveness and excellence in training and marriage. Blah blah blah. Right. So they added that. That's new stuff, which is interesting because we already had a non-discrimination ethic. So I can appreciate trying to diversify. I do. But I am also sensitive to, whenever I've mentioned diversity of thought, I get snarls, because that's apparently not good enough. When I say diversity of economy, I get snarls.
It's a code
When
for
I
white
say,
supremacy.
yeah, apparently. So I guess I'm apparently I'm a bigot or something. So I want to know what the definition of equity is. We hear diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity sounds good as long as it's, diversity of everything and it's not compulsory, because that would be a violation of autonomy also. I get inclusion. We want to be inclusive. That's fine. I don't want to exclude people, except the organization itself is exclusive because it portends that it's better than everybody else, because it literally says on number 2, distinctiveness and excellence in training of marriage and family therapists. I don't know how you can be distinct and inclusive at the same time. I don't know, but so how far does inclusion go? But I'll grant that without nitpicking too much. But what does equity mean? Because when I hear equity, and I am purposely playing dumb here, because I sort of know what it means, but I also don't. Equity to me is how much value is in a given product, on a basis over time. like I have equity in my home. I lose equity in my car. I have equity in my business. What does equity mean in a diversity, equity, and inclusion phraseology in this type of document?
I think the basics, if I can throw something out of the basics, would be like equality would be like equal opportunity, and equity would be equal outcomes. So what they would view equality as a fundamentally unfair thing, because you're treating people equally who are not equal. So a heterosexual white man comes in, they have all the privilege. A black lesbian comes in, is oppressed. If you treat those two groups equally, you're actually furthering oppression by not treating them unequally. So equity would put a thumb on the scale towards the person who they view as oppressed, in order to kind of like balance the historical scales, if that makes sense.
Do we have a how as to that, the way that's executed? Because I've always been confused, and now I'm not being purposely obtuse either. I knew what equity meant. It meant equality of outcome, but I legitimately don't know the how. Like, and I also don't agree with the baked in unequal thing. Like, that's somebody's subjective opinion that there's a black lesbian couple that comes in and they're somehow unequal to the heterosexual male and heterosexual female who are a couple. I don't understand the metrics, but let's presume that there are some sort of metrics to that. What is the execution of how to make them equal, and how do we know when we get there if the a priori presumption is that they are unequal walking in the door? Like,
I can give you an educational example.
yeah, please.
But many people don't realize that the term equity, in the context we're discussing it, is written into the Title I Education Code. And Title I Education Code governs kind of primarily serving students who are
Disadvantaged schools, right?
disadvantaged, low
Yeah.
income, who are coming from a background that would potentially limit their academic performance.
That would be economic disadvantage, right? Where we have a metric that says you have less money than somebody else.
I would say that's the original intent of Title I code, yes.
Okay.
However, under Title I programs, you are required in a school to develop an equity plan. And the way that you do this is you take your state standardized testing data and you disaggregate, meaning you pull apart subgroups within the data, and you look at, okay, how did this subgroup perform compared to this other subgroup? And, so in Texas, I can't name all the groups off the top of my head, but I'll do the best I can. So you have African American students, you have Native American students, you have Hispanic students, white students, Asian Pacific Islander, and maybe a couple of other subgroups that are listed in there. So then you're supposed to, you've picked apart the testing performance data for these subgroups, and then
those are all just, it's only racial subgroups.
There is an economically disadvantaged subgroup, and a special populations subgroup that would include like your McKinney-Vento homeless students and your what we call highly mobile at risk, which are military, McKinney-Vento homeless, foster, migrant.
Do disabilities come into play?
On the special education side, yeah, you would also pull out your sped population, any of them who were testing. Mm-hmm.
So I'm picturing a Venn diagram. I want you to continue, but I'm picturing a Venn diagram where there's overlaps in certain areas.
There, absolutely, yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so, but the interesting part of it to me, and this, when I talk with coworkers who are educators, I try to kind of teach them about this forced equality of outcome thing in a very simple way, because I'll ask them, okay, why are we disaggregating racial groups here? And
right.
They don't usually have an answer for that. And the answer might be something like, well, it's in the Title I requirements, or it's in the state law requirements.
Because I was told to, because just following orders, right? Yeah.
And then I ask them, okay, so let's take two of these groups, for example. Let's take African American students and Pacific Islander students. And let's say you've got two students who are functioning at basically the same level in the same subjects, like as close to identical as they can be. What's going to be the difference in intervention that you're going to employ to help these two students based on the racial group that we've disaggregated this into? And then their eyes get really big because they go, oh, there's no difference. We're doing the same intervention. Because the problem is not the presence of a racial identity in academic performance. So the problem is there's a skill deficit that is probably most likely the result of socioeconomic disadvantage, not identification with a particular culture or racial identity. And so then, once I get to that point in the discussion and people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And you can kind of highlight how some of that stuff got interjected later into the Title I code, just as it has in our ethical codes, and that it really isn't compatible with what we stated our goal is in the long run. But so that's the intent. So then we're going to I guess pay more attention to this subgroup of students by at least isolating them in terms of data set and focusing some interventions on them that are no different than the interventions you would do with a student from a different group.
So we
It's
don't
silly.
know is the short answer to bring it back to here, right? Like
Yes.
the ethical codes for AMFT, equity. What am I supposed to try harder with? Which group is it again? Like I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So this sounds like academic fluff and virtue signaling to me. It sounds really nice, but there's for tell you for a profession that allegedly values research and codified outcomes, I legitimately have no idea what they mean. I don't know how I'm supposed to do this.
I
Like,
don't
what
know
does it
how it
look like
is
in the
for
office?
marriage and family people, but certainly in my program, like if you were to take the Daryl Dwing Sue book, Counseling the Culture Diverse, 8th edition, if you were to take that seriously, you would look at a group and say, if this person is marginalized, I am going to try to convince them like away from personal responsibility. Nothing that happens in your life is your fault. It's all due to systemic and structural factors. If I have a heterosexual white male client, that's in the privileged oppressor category. So I'm going to try to get you to awaken to the nature of your complicity with white supremacy, your privilege, how you're involved in oppressing racial minorities and gay people and women and things like that. So this social justice mission is kind of the, what's operating, what's driving a lot of my therapy, and a lot of the techniques that we talk about are really secondary compared to that mission.
I want you to clip just that part where you said social justice is driving my therapy. Because now we can say Ryan Rogers is a fraud.
Get the Ryan Rogers
Please do.
soundboard set up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, okay. Right. What does that have to do with therapy? Like, are we just throwing the idea of growth and development out the window then? And we're recentering what we do in the office to mean that we're trying to convince people of their victimhood or their victimization or their oppressorhood or their oppressization or whatever we want to call it. And it has nothing at all to do with like, hey, Jonathan, really need help with my drinking. Like, I really need to stop drinking. You know what you need to do, Jonathan? You need to, I guess you're both Jonathan in this. This is what the physical illness does to me. I can't think straight. It's like Ryan and Jonathan. Ryan's the patient, right? Jonathan's the clinician. Ryan says, I need help with my drink. And Jonathan says, no, what you need help with is your whiteness. Is that really what we're supposed to be doing to people? Because that's what equity is? Is that really what we're doing? Because that seems to fly in the face of, I don't know, the rest of the, the code: informed consent, unethical conduct, relationship beneficial to client. Like,
let me just throw in there really quick that the hilarious part of what you just said, Jake, is that takes me instantly to our other Jacob's story about his first interaction trying to get PTSD treatment, where he showed up with moderate to severe PTSD, and the therapist goes, have you ever thought you might be trans?
Yeah.
I also want to say that I know you've left the group chat, but I've started referring to Jake W as adult Jake.
Yes, you were adult Jake, and then Freeman is just Jacob, I guess, or child Jake. I'm not sure. That's unclear.
I mean, I do have a few years on him, so I guess maybe that works. Yeah. So moving on with this ethical code changes, because I think people maybe want to hear about that. There's a couple that I wanted to highlight. I pulled them up in my email here. There's something here that I think will be weaponized to suppress free speech. And it's 3.11 public statements. It used to say marriage and family therapists, because of their ability to influence and alter the lives of others, exercise special care when making, professional recommendations, making public their professional recommendations and opinions through testimony or other public statements. Now, what they're proposing, it says, is marriage and family therapists, because of their ability to influence and alter the lives of others and the public perception of the profession, adhere to professional standards when making professional recommendations or giving opinions through testimony or other public statements. This sounds like it's really chilling. So, in other words, if we were to go on X and say, I think therapy in perpetuity is unethical, everybody should be discharged and at some point because healing is possible. If someone decides that I have somehow invoked harm upon the profession, I did not adhere to professional standards when giving that opinion in a public statement, I could at least be investigated for that statement. Now, it sounds like a great statement. It sounds like hope giving. It sounds like it's inspirational. Like, yeah, people really should be able to heal from their illnesses. But if some practitioner out there has a different view and looks askance at that and says, you're harming the profession by daring to tell people they should be off the calendar, as ludicrous as that sounds, I mean, I've heard more ludicrous things that were given merit. That sounds like it could be used to suppress speech. Now, that's a pretty mundane thing. Now, imagine somebody goes out and says something like, children cannot consent to puberty blockers, right? As a therapist, and say, I'm not going to sign off on a letter for a child to go through life-altering, permanent sterilization and surgery because I'd rather treat the psychiatric ailment first through talk therapy than by cutting off healthy body parts. Now you really got an accusation of like the public perception of the profession, professional standards, especially if those professional standards are encoded in a 26-page document that says we're supposed to agree with the patient as they come in. And you definitely gave an opinion, through a public statement. So I think that is going to have a deleterious effect on speech. I think that's, it's very dangerous.
Potentially destructive
horrible.
of freedom of thought and innovation within the whole profession.
Well, and one might say it runs contrary to the diversity statement, because if you're not allowing difference of opinion, then you're not really diverse, are you? So I would be curious if I were a member of the organization and my opinion were actually, taken seriously, which it wasn't when I was a member of the organization and a leader in my state, then I would try to box them in. And you mentioned double binds before. Double binds are not always a bad thing. Double binds, when there's power and coercion and both choices are negative or could do harm, are very bad. But you could do a therapeutic double bind where you present what the person has said in two different forms and fashions and say, help me reconcile this. I would put the association in a double bind intentionally and say, help me make sense of this. How can we be diverse and put on notice that people need to be aware of their opinions? Help me figure that out. Because I don't know what these quote unquote professional standards are unless you've got them listed. And I don't see anything in professional standards that say you can't have an opinion. That's not a thing. So are we going to get more and more restrictive on our standards? Where are they printed? Under what conditions? What is best practice? Because best practice is whatever somebody says it is. Jonathan Shedler has a whole opinion on what best practice is, especially related to CBT and evidence-based. So it's like if I say, I think analytic psychology is the best way to go about battling addiction. Somebody else says no because this paper says CBT. Do I get in trouble with my licensing board because I dared to opine that on X? I don't know, but I think it's absolutely going to be used to weaponize, somebody's opinion over somebody else and to kill speech. That's another one. There's a bunch of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the ones, let me toss in just to join in that part of the conversation. One of the ones that I expressed concern about, and again, I don't think it's not a problem on its surface. It's very short. It's 1.6. Abuse of the therapeutic relationship, which they didn't actually change anything, but I commented on it anyway because I wanted to. Marriage and family therapists do not abuse their power in therapeutic relationships.
Ooh, when you talk about what all y'all have just talking about, and then you bring that point in there, that has a different hit to it.
To taking the authoritative position of overriding a client's moral framework in favor of a moral framework that you personally hold, let's just pretend that we don't know what the frameworks are that we're talking about, is to me clearly a violation of 1.6 and is being done widespread across the field and is encouraged in like all of the online therapy forums that we have been a part of or kind of poked around in and read comments on and been shocked about at different times. And you hit the nail on the head, Ryan, with what I wanted to say about that. Like if you think about everything that Jake was just saying, and then you read this ethical code that sounds really great on the surface and go, yeah, but except it's happening as a matter of course, and you're totally silent about it. It becomes self-invalidating and self-defeating really, really quickly. And then add what Jake said about diversity just then.
You're saying 1.6, but 1.6 is reports of unethical conduct. Did they change the numbers?
They changed the numbering.
Okay.
I'm looking at the red line.
I don't have your copy in front of me.
The updated version. Yeah, it's the new number is 1.6. It probably was. I could tell you if I looked really close.
It's 1.7. It's right below it.
It's shifted.
I'm blind.
And that's one thing they did. They shifted a bunch of the numbers because they removed some and they added some in the course of all of that. Yep, definitely.
Yeah, I think they combined 4 and 5, right? 1.4 and 5, something like that.
Yeah.
To me, it feels like let's imagine we were a medical program who were training brain surgeons, and then one day somebody comes in. It's like, hey, we want to start a recycling program here. Okay, cool. We'll put a recycling bucket down the hall for you to put cans and whatever in. And it's like, even if you think like recycling is a good thing, even if you think social justice is a good thing, let's imagine this program for training brain surgeons where like 80-90% of their time is devoted to recycling. It's like we started here with this specific mission of helping people with like a brain tumor. And now it's like, even if you believe this mission of recycling is like a very good mission, we have lost what we actually came here to do.
It's even wilder than that because the assumption is that if we practice recycling really, really good, our patients will get better.
That's brilliant. Yeah. There's something else that I think I want to bring attention to because I believe it is worthwhile to the listening audience because we get, I don't know you guys, but I get this all the time. People want to have us write letters for them. And usually it's to testify that they're doing well or to take their side in some legal battle or another. Mm-hmm. Often it's custody. So used to be in 7.8, 7.7, 7.8, they would, let me pull it up here real quick so I don't misread. So I want to get the numbers right. They changed the numbers. This makes for good radio. You're just shuffling papers and bang in the microphone. Okay, so yes, they changed. Yeah, 7.7, 7.8. So now they're 7.5 and 7.6, but it says avoiding dual roles. Now, there's an old canard that says don't have dual relationships. That's not what the ethical codes say. The ethical codes say avoid dual relationships that could become coercive or manipulative, right? So this is dual roles, though. And this has specifically to do with like evaluations and treatment. So listen to current language and we'll contrast it. So marriage and family therapists avoid providing therapy. So avoid, right? It's not a shall. Avoid providing therapy to clients for whom the therapist has provided a forensic evaluation and avoid providing evaluations for those who are clients unless otherwise mandated by legal systems. And there's some cover for the legal mandate too, because you can hide behind certain things if you don't want to do it as a breach, but I'm not going to get into that. The point is almost every ethical code I've read says something similar, whether it's NBCC or ACA or NASA or ours. It says, don't treat those whom you've evaluated for a forensic purpose and don't evaluate anybody you've already treated. And the reason is you're compromised either way. You declare something to go forward and treat this person is very, very challenging. And to have somebody you've been treating and then to evaluate him, you're compromised, right? You've already got your mind made up. So now what they've said is, if they've made it stronger, and I really appreciate this. So it's not all thorns. There's some roses to this
Agree.
this modification. So it says now marriage and family therapists must not provide forensic evaluations or act as an expert witness for current or former clients unless otherwise mandated by legal systems. Marriage and family therapists must not provide therapeutic services to individuals for whom the marriage and family therapist has previously provided forensic services or expert witness services. So now they took the avoid all the way out and said, you shall not do this. I like that. Now, right on the heels of that is the separation of custody evaluations. So it used to say MFTs avoid conflict, again, the avoid language. MFTs avoid conflicts of interest in treating minors or adults involved in custody visitation actions by not performing evaluations for custody residence or visitation of the minor. MFTs who treat minors may provide the court or mental health professional performing the evaluation with information. Client from the marriage family therapist perspective as a treating, clinician. Now it says MFTs must not provide custody evaluations for clients unless mandated by law or judicial order. And again, I could make an argument that I shouldn't do that either based on some disclosure stuff that's nested in like 2.3, I want to say. And then it says MFTs may provide the court or mental health professional performing the evaluation with information about the minor so long as appropriate authorization is obtained. But again, they've changed it from avoid to must not provide. And I really appreciate that. Here's the problem though. It could be good that this is so ironclad because now we're just free to treat and we have no worry about ever being dragged into a custody battle. But we also now don't ever get to opine unless ordered. And I don't know if I like the idea that we would be ordered to opine on somebody's custody residence or visitation anyway. But I do appreciate that it's strengthened because time and time and time again, we get hired not on the surface, but later, 2-3 sessions in, specifically for that reason. Sometimes people will actually say on the phone, I need a letter for court. Can you talk to my kid and tell them that I'm the good parent? No, we don't do that.
Nope.
Right?
Nope. Hard no.
Yeah. Now we actually have something to point to that says must not instead of avoids, because the avoid language made it a little gray. And I think that's how certain people have gotten away with it for a little while. As distasteful as it is, they can get sucked into some cluster B psychopathology and believe one parent over the other through lies and deceit and manipulation. But now we're just not allowed to at all.
So
Yeah.
we've been going about an hour and a half now. I'm wondering if we could get to a point of resolution or, solutions to this you guys see.
Blow it up and start over.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our podcast. Thank you for listening. I'm going to pull Jake's line now. Here's the other thing I wanted to sneak in there earlier, and this is a shout out to Jake Freeman. Whenever I said the thing, I was continuing Ryan's thought process there about the recycling and the cans, and if we recycle real good, our patients will get better. Then somebody should have hopped in there and said either think about it or write that down. Either one of those are acceptable responses to that kind of thought out loud. On some other podcasts, like we've talked about the parallel economies that are emerging, and I really think that's part of the answer, where we could get some organizations that are parallel to those like LMFT and have them become strong enough in both philosophy and membership that they pose a threat to the existing establishment organizations. And that's not what I want to see. What I would really want to see is for the organizations and their leadership to course correct themselves and maintain continuity of that professional identity. And I want to be really clear about that. That's why I took the time to write a multi-page response to an organization I'm not even a member of anymore, because I want that to occur. And I want to treat those folks reading that as if they're capable of hearing and understanding and attempting to really, really, truly understand my intent in sending that. However, go back to, we have these other organizations like AMHP, shout out AMHP, that Ryan and I will be seeing each other at their conference next week. We have Open Therapy Institute. I know it's not the same type of organization, but we have GenSpect, who just had their conference, who are Do No Harm. Do No Harm is another similar organization. Like we have these
Critical
other
Therapy
organizations.
Antidote.
Thank you. I would not want to leave Critical Therapy Antidote out of that list. Shout out to all of these people because they're
Therapy First also not the
yes,
same, but similar.
yeah. So and man, I so appreciate the people that took the time to lay the groundwork for those new organizations, and maybe those new organizations will be what fills the gaps of innovation and knowledge that we're talking about. Um, I think I think that has to be part of it. Um, I think the public can play a role somewhat. I don't know exactly what. It's hard to educate widespread about all these nuances of underlying things and history and why things are philosophically incompatible. Um, one of the things that I said, I won't read it in detail, but one of the things that I said in my comments that I sent to AAMFT over this revision is that they need to become very realistic about the credibility crisis that we have entered. I don't know that they would acknowledge that we've entered a credibility crisis, but
They
you
absolutely
know,
will not. No, they will not. No. There is no credibility crisis as far as they're concerned.
and I think you're probably right because as you framed it earlier in our discussion today, they're still of the mindset that we're in this sectarian debate out here in the professional world about whose therapeutic baptism is holier. Um, it's they're not attuned to the groundwork or the ground level realities of what the public experience when they're trying to sort their way through all this therapy stuff. I will say something that is happening. I think is something like I'm not going to remember her handle correctly, but the kind of the banner name of the account is Truth Teller. And these stories like hers of a child who's been either lost or drastically negatively impacted due to like gender ideology and the medical intervention that has accompanied that. Like I think as those stories become more widely known, then we might get a course correction. And I hate that that's the reality that we're looking at. Um, I just hope I hope it happens. I hope course correction happens quickly because I don't want to see more people go down those roads at all. It's just it's heartbreaking to see. Um, and so there's a couple of thoughts. I don't know what else y'all might say.
I So I agree. The parallels to this in the firearms community are striking, and I started uncovering it circa 2019 when I took up with Walk the Talk America, and definitely into 2020 when I realized that there's just a bunch of I like the sectarian comparison about whose baptism is holier because the gun community has done that. The NRA has been facing a reckoning for a really long time, the National Rifle Association, because its leadership was so foul and they just refused to look at itself, at themselves, I should say, the organization at itself. And only now, after years and years and years of criticism internally, externally, actual litigation, are they going, yeah, maybe we could do some stuff, right? It's like they just still don't get it. And so watching that at the same time I watched this, I used to be a member of ACA too, and I pulled the plug in 2020 when they went full blown BLM and they had a Black Lives Matter banner on their website in the summer of 2020. And I'm like, I'm a member of this organization and I'm trying to train cops. Like, I'm a member of an organization that is openly anti-police. Like, I can't do this anymore. So I terminated my membership. There's no chance that we could have a reasonable conversation with that organization's leadership and say, hey, man, you're pushing people away. They won't get it because they are the self-proclaimed pontiffs of all that is good and holy, and their baptisms are the best, nay, the only, right? So you can't have a reasonable conversation. So I think that it does require pressure from the outside. Now, what does that look like? More of us leaving and joining these other organizations, but also then to in turn going to our licensing board and say, we're not members of those organizations. I'm not buying into what you're selling. I'm a member of this organization. If you want to, talk to me like an adult, you can talk to me like an adult, but I'm not going to play along with you. So whatever that looks like, we just say, I am a member of professional organizations. They are these ones. And here's why I believe they're just as credible, if not more so. Right. And then force the hand of some of the licensing entities. I think, I still am a member of NBCC because they haven't gone off the deep end yet. I hope they don't. And maybe that's what it looks like too, because NBCC does administer examinations as well. And that's one part of how you obtain licensure is you got to take a test and somebody has to administer that test. Now, AMFT also has a test and they'll say that they're a separate entity, but we know that they're not. AMFTRB absolutely is influenced by AAMFT. So, until somebody steps into the standardized testing realm, I think we're going to have a little bit of a tough time convincing the broader public that the club that we join matters, because it doesn't. And then the testing instrument has to be examined as well, because at least in my state, and I don't know how it is everywhere else, you can take that test as many times as you want, fail it as many times as you want, and you will still retain your license. Nurses don't get to do that. And again, someone bearing my resemblance and sounding a lot like me once upon a time, circa 2016 to 2019, dared propose that we put a cap on the number of tests you could fail and still maintain your licensure. And heads popped because they couldn't wrap their brains around the idea that this thing either mattered so much that it was limited to how many times you could fail it, or it didn't matter at all, and the state should not be complicit in generating revenue for the testing company. So you're either competent to practice and you don't need the test, or you're incompetent to practice and you shouldn't have a license because you failed the test. But nobody could understand that. It was just like, let so-and-so take the test 6-7 times over and over and over again. It's like, well, they're treating people while they're doing this, right? Either the test matters and we shouldn't let them treat people, or it doesn't matter. So somebody has to step into that void too and administer a test that matters. But along the way, simply talking about the differences, I think, to our patients really helps as well. That some of the credibility crisis that we have is in the form of people just relinquishing their licensing and going into professional coaching and saying, look, I did this for a really long time. You could trust me. My results are really good. And then they go by word of mouth and they don't have to worry about psychologytoday.com or dealing with managed care and its abysmal reimbursement rates while they're continuing to raise premiums on their members while not paying the providers. It's, the whole thing is, I won't say it's entirely broken because the structure is okay, but it's flirting with rupture. And this is just one component. Accrediting bodies. I mean, Susanna Alexander talks all about that. I mean, she's, Diogenes in Exile, for those of you who are interested in seeing her work, she's tackling the accrediting bodies, and we gotta dig into those folks too. And so to wrap this up, Jonathan, to your point, it's unfortunate that so many people have to be harmed, and it's also unfortunate that the focus seems to be on the gender ideology and the medicalization of sex transition, if we can call such a thing, because there is no such thing as transitioning sex. Sex is immutable. You can change your appearance, but you can't change your sex, because there are so many other presentations that get negatively impacted by this. It's not just that just happens to be front and center because, boys are playing in girls' sports and taking over their locker rooms and stuff. But it's people who simply fail to get treated adequately because the clinician's head isn't screwed on straight. They come in for anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder or personality disorders or addiction or eating disorders. And we just fumble away the opportunity to provide help and healing because we're so wrapped around our compulsion to convert them into our religion that they just swirl and nobody gets well. And we look and we go, why is mental illness getting worse? That's why the providers suck. That's why, because we've totally inverted our entire mission. We've stopped treating illnesses and started pandering to the ideology. It's really, really bad. Really bad.
We started a canned recycling operation.
We did. We did. And we said that if we recycle enough cans, brain tumors will go away.
I love that. Any closing thoughts, guys?
I think you just had them. I got to go pee.
Well, we can wrap up then. Jonathan, you got anything?
I want to highlight just one thing that Jake said there, because I don't want it to fly by the listener, something that he said under the surface that was really good, which is that there's a lot of times there's financial incentive and there's um, how would you say that? Like social incentive to just allow things to happen. And so the one that he alluded to, and just a flyby comment there was, well, there's a financial incentive for giving people the opportunity to take the test as many times as they want, because then the testing entity gets to make revenue off of that. But then that ties right back into what he was just saying, which is that it also tragically lowers the rigor bar, the threshold of entry to the profession, which leads to the credibility crisis problem, which leads to the place that we're
Poor
recycling
outcomes.
cans.
Yeah.
So that's just a nice little highlight and some of the background that Jake mentioned that I want people to catch.
Awesome. I love it, guys. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks
If
for
y'all
having
great.
me.
If y'all
I'm
hang
nipping at
out 1
Jonathan's
second.
heels. Jonathan's nipping at Katie's heels. We're all just a bunch of heel nippers.
Trying to
It's getting close.
pump our numbers for reality therapy appearances. It's not a bad
Yeah.
deal. It's not a
Heel
bad deal.
nippers are us.